The rain wasn't the worst part. It was the weight of it. Each drop felt like it was adding to the load on her shoulders, sinking into the thin gray fabric of her hoodie, chilling her skin, reminding her of the miles still left to walk. The city smelled of wet asphalt and exhaustion. Naomi pulled the hood lower, her old jeans already soaked through at the cuffs, and kept her eyes on the cracked pavement in front of her. Just another Tuesday. Another 16-hour shift folding other people's clean, warm laundry while hers piled up, damp and forgotten, in a corner of her tiny apartment. The bus shelter was a small mercy, a flimsy plastic shield against the relentless downpour. She almost didn't stop, her homing instinct screaming for the relative warmth of her own four walls, but a flicker of movement caught her eye. A small, hunched figure on the bench. An old woman, her hair a perfect silver helmet, sat with her hands clutching a silk purse in her lap. She wore a traditional kimono, the deep indigo silk looking tragically out of place against the grimy plastic of the shelter. Her shoulders trembled, a fine, ceaseless shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. Naomi hesitated. This part of town late at night was a place for keeping your head down, for minding your own business. But the woman's face, when she looked up at the sound of Naomi's worn sneakers squelching to a halt, was a mask of placid confusion. Her eyes, dark and clouded, didn't seem to register Naomi at all. They were looking through her, into a memory or a fear Naomi couldn't see.
Mom.
Naomi's voice was quiet. Are you all right? The last bus came through an hour ago. The woman didn't answer. She just continued to shiver, her gaze distant. Her skin looked like parchment, stretched thin over delicate bones. This was wrong. This was the kind of wrong you couldn't just walk away from. With a sigh that fogged in the cold air, Naomi stepped fully under the shelter. Is there someone I can call for you? A family member? She tried again, her voice gentle. The woman's gaze drifted down to the purse in her lap. Her fingers, gnarled with age, fumbled with the clasp. Naomi knelt, her knees protesting against the cold, wet concrete. Here, let me. She carefully took the purse. It was heavy, the silk embroidered with silver cranes. Inside, nestled between a lace handkerchief and a tube of crimson lipstick, was a sleek, black smartphone. A world away from the crack-screen device in Naomi's own pocket. She turned it on. The screen lit up with a picture of a severe-looking man against a backdrop of cherry blossoms.
No pascode.
A blessing. Under the emergency contacts, there was only one entry, listed simply as run. Naomi pressed the call button. It rang twice, a sharp, electronic sound that cut through the drumming of the rain. Then a voice answered. It wasn't a greeting. It was a sound. A low, resonant syllable that was more of a command for attention than a question. Yes. The voice was like cold steel. No warmth, no inflection, just absolute, bottomless certainty. It was the kind of voice that didn't need to be raised to be heard over hurricane. Hello? My name is Naomi. I'm at the bus stop on West Camden and 4th. I'm with an elderly woman. I think she might be your grandmother? She seems confused. Silence. For a long, heavy moment, Naomi thought he'd hung up. The silence wasn't empty. It was calculating. It was the sound of a predator assessing a new element in its environment. Do not move, the voice said. It was not a request. Do not speak to her. Do not let anyone else near her. I am 10 minutes away. The line went dead. Naomi looked from the phone back to the old woman, who was now humming a soft, tuneless melody. 10 minutes. It felt like a lifetime. She tucked the woman's phone back into her purse and sat on the bench, deliberately leaving a respectful space between them, but close enough to shield her a little more from the wind. She did as she was told. She didn't speak. She just waited, listening to the rhythm of the rain and the old woman's quiet song, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach.
He was there in 7.
A car, a black sedan so polished it seemed to drink the meager streetlights, pulled up to the curb with impossible silence. It didn't belong in this neighborhood of peeling paint and overflowing dumpsters. It was a creature from another world. The back door opened, and a man unfolded himself from the interior. He was tall, impossibly so, and wore a suit that was a shade of charcoal so dark it was almost black. It was tailored with surgical precision, fitting his broad shoulders and narrow waist in a way that spoke of obscene expense. He moved with a liquid grace that was utterly at odds with his size, his footsteps making no sound on the wet pavement. Naomi's first coherent thought was of his hands. They were large, with long, elegant fingers, and as he stepped into the light of the shelter, she saw the intricate lines of a tattoo peeking from beneath the starched white cuff of his shirt. Dark ink, swirling into the shape of a dragon's scale. His eyes found her immediately. They were dark, intelligent, and completely devoid of emotion. He looked at her not like a person, but like a problem to be solved. His gaze swept over her worn hoodie, her soaked jeans, her tired face, and dismissed her in a single, silent beat. Then he turned his attention to his grandmother. "Grandmother," he said. His voice was softer now, but it still held that core of unyielding steel. The old woman looked up, and a flicker of recognition crossed her features. "Run," she whispered, her voice a dry rustle. "The rain, it came again." "I know," he said, his expression unchanging. He knelt before her, his expensive suit befitting a king, and took her small, trembling hands in his. "Let's go home. It's warm there." Another man, built like a refrigerator and dressed in a similar, though less perfect, suit, emerged from the driver's side and opened a large black umbrella. He held it over Ren and his grandmother as Ren gently helped her to her feet. The entire exchange was silent, efficient, and practiced. Naomi stood up, ready to melt back into the night, her good deed done. She had a life to get back to, meager as it was. But as she turned to leave, the man, Ren, spoke without looking at her. "Where do you live?" The question stopped her cold. It wasn't polite. It was an interrogation. I'm just a few blocks from here. I can walk." He finally turned his head, his dark eyes locking onto hers. The sheer force of his attention was a physical thing, a pressure against her chest. "That was not what I asked." The driver had settled the grandmother into the back of the car and now stood silently by the open passenger door, waiting. The rain hammered down on the umbrella he held. The message was clear. This was not an offer. It was a summons. To refuse was not an option she possessed. Her heart, which had been steady moments before, began a low, heavy thrum against her ribs. She had stepped out of her world and into his, and she had the terrifying feeling that the door back had just been locked. Swallowing the lump of fear in her throat, she walked toward the waiting car. The leather seats were cool against her damp clothes, and the interior smelled of cedar and something else, something metallic and clean, like the air after a lightning strike. The door closed with a solid, final thud, sealing her inside with the storm. The drive was suffocatingly quiet. The city slid past the tinted windows, a blur of neon and rain. The old woman had fallen asleep in the corner, her breathing soft and even. Ren sat beside Naomi, a statue carved from shadow and stillness. He didn't look at her.
He didn't speak.
He simply existed, a dense pocket of gravity that pulled all the air and light in the car toward him. Naomi stared straight ahead, her hands clenched in her lap. This wasn't a ride home. This was a kidnapping, albeit a very polite one. The car wasn't heading toward the rundown west side where she lived. It was climbing, ascending into the glittering heart of the city, toward the glass and steel towers that scraped the sky. They passed through a private gate, down into a silent, pristine garage, and stopped in a reserved spot directly in front of an elevator. "Come," Rin said. It was the first word he'd spoken since the bus stop. She followed him and the driver, who was now gently rousing the grandmother. The elevator ascended without a sound, the numbers climbing at a dizzying rate. It opened directly into a penthouse suite that was larger than Naomi's entire apartment building. The floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a panoramic view of the storm-lashed city below. The space was minimalist, decorated in shades of gray, black, and white. It was less a home and more a gallery or a fortress. A woman in a simple black dress appeared, bowing low. "Master Ishikawa, Your grandmother as well. She is tired, Ren replied, his tone clipped. Prepare her room. And bring tea to the main living area. Ishikawa. The name echoed in Naomi's mind, connecting with whispered rumors she'd heard at work, stories of the clans that ran the city's hidden economy, of the Yakuza who operated behind legitimate fronts. The Ishikawa-gumi. She felt a cold dread seep into her bones. She hadn't just helped a lost old woman. She had stumbled into the private life of a king. Ren led her to a seating area with low, black leather sofas. He gestured for her to sit, but remained standing himself, looking out at the rain-streaked window. My grandmother has moments of confusion, he said, his back still to her. She wanders. This is the first time she has wandered so far. I'm glad I was there to help, Naomi said, her voice barely a whisper. He turned slowly. Are you? His eyes were unreadable. You saw a moment of weakness, a vulnerability in my family. In this world, such things are a currency. Information is a weapon. I don't know anything, she said quickly, her pulse hammering. I just saw an old woman who needed help. I'm not part of your world. You are now, he said, the words flat and final. You were there. You made the call. Your voice is now connected to this event. You are a loose thread. The woman in the black dress returned with a tray, setting down 2 delicate porcelain cups of steaming tea. The scent of jasmine filled the air. Ren ignored it. He walked to a wet bar in the corner and poured himself a measure of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. What do you want from me? Naomi asked, forcing her voice to remain steady. He took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving her face. For now, you will stay here, until I can be certain that this thread can be cut or woven into place. Suddenly, the grandmother, who had been led toward another room, stopped in the doorway. She turned and her cloudy eyes fixed on Naomi. A gentle, sad smile touched her lips. Hannah, she said, her voice clear as a bell. You came back. I knew you would. She looked at Ren, her expression pleading. Don't let the rain take her again, Ren. You must not fail again. The name hung in the air between them. Ren's posture went rigid. The glass in his hand trembled, the barest fraction of a millimeter, but Naomi saw it. A crack in the marble facade. For the first time, she saw something behind his eyes other than cold control. It was a flicker of old, deep pain. A wound. He had failed to protect a woman named Hannah, and his grandmother's broken mind was a living monument to that failure. Just then, his phone buzzed, a low, insistent vibration on the marble bar. He answered it, turning away from her again. His conversation was in Japanese, his voice a low, lethal murmur. Naomi couldn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. The danger that had misplaced his grandmother was not gone. It was escalating. In that moment, she saw her chance. Everyone's attention was elsewhere. The driver was with the grandmother, the housekeeper had vanished, and Ren was consumed by the call. The elevator she came in on was right there. Freedom was a button press away. She could run, disappear back into the anonymity of her life. She half rose from the sofa, her muscles tense to flee. But her eyes caught the grandmother's. The old woman was watching her, that same confused, pleading look on her face. She still thought Naomi was Hannah. She was frail, lost, and terrified. And then Naomi looked at Ren, at the tension in his shoulders, the white-knuckled grip on his phone. He was a monster, a king in a violent world. But in his grandmother's words, Naomi had heard the echo of a man who had lost someone. A man who carried the shame of that loss like a shroud. She sank back into the sofa. Instead of running to the elevator, she stood up and walked slowly toward his grandmother. She gently took the old woman's hand. It was cold and fragile, like a bird's wing. It's okay, Naomi said softly. I'm here. The rain won't take me. When Ren finished his call and turned around, he saw her there. Her dark skin a stark contrast to his grandmother's pale fragility, her hand holding his grandmother's with a quiet, steady strength. He said nothing, but his eyes narrowed, a flicker of something unreadable, surprise, suspicion, something more, passing through their depths. The commotion was over, the immediate crisis handled on the phone. He walked over to where she stood. "Why didn't you run?" he asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. They were closer than they had been before. She had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. She could smell the faint, clean scent of cedar from his suit, mixed with the rain he'd carried in with him. The air between them crackled with a strange energy. She was scared, Naomi said, her voice a quiet defiance. "And you were busy." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was a piece of it. She told herself it was pity. She told herself it was the right thing to do. But looking into his dark, searching eyes, she knew it was more complicated than that. She had seen a glimpse of the man beneath the monster, and against all reason, she hadn't been able to turn away. His control solidified again, the brief vulnerability vanishing as if it had never been. But something had shifted. He no longer looked at her as just a loose thread. He looked at her like a puzzle he didn't understand. The days that followed blurred into a strange routine. Naomi was a ghost in his penthouse, a prisoner in a cage of silk and glass. She ate meals prepared by a silent chef, wore clothes that appeared in her closet, simple, elegant things of black and gray that fit perfectly, and watched the city live its life thousands of feet below. She was allowed books, television, anything she wanted, except the one thing she craved, the front door. Run was a fleeting presence. He would leave before she woke and return long after dark. But she felt his influence everywhere. In the way his men, silent and watchful, bowed their heads when she passed. In the hushed, respectful tones of the housekeeper. This was his empire, and she was a strange, captured bird within its walls. The true threat soon took on a name. The Hashimoto gumi. Rin never spoke of them to her, but she pieced it together from overheard whispers and the tension that thrummed through the penthouse whenever a certain name was mentioned. They were rivals, and they were circling. It was their maneuverings that had left his grandmother stranded, a pawn in a much larger, more dangerous game. They were testing his control, looking for a weakness. One evening, the weakness they were looking for found her. She was in the small library off the main living area when the screaming began. Not of pain, but of tearing metal and shattering glass. An explosion somewhere below them. The entire tower shuddered. The lights flickered and died, plunging the penthouse into an emergency-lit twilight. Before Naomi could even process what was happening, the library doors burst open. It was Run. He wasn't wearing a suit, but a simple black shirt and trousers. In his hand was a gun, held with a familiarity that was terrifying. "Stay behind me," he ordered, his voice a blade of calm in the chaos. He moved through the darkened apartment with the fluid deadliness of a panther. His men were already in position, shadows with their own weapons, communicating in clipped, urgent Japanese. Another explosion, closer this time, rocked the building. The windows overlooking the city shattered, a waterfall of glass cascading into the night, letting in the howl of the wind and the distant scream of sirens. They were in the main corridor when two figures in dark gear dropped from the ceiling, rappelling down from the floor above. Ren didn't hesitate. There were two sharp, suppressed cracks from his weapon. The figures crumpled to the ground, lifeless. He moved over them without a second glance, pulling Naomi along with him. His hand was a steel band around her arm, his body a shield between her and the violence. They were exposed, caught in the long hallway. One of Ren's men fell, a silent, collapsing heap. From the far end of the hall, another attacker appeared, raising a weapon. Ren shoved Naomi hard, sending her stumbling behind a large marble pillar, just as a spray of automatic fire chewed through the wall where she had been standing. He returned fire, a controlled, precise burst. The attacker went down. But in that exchange, Naomi saw another man, injured but not dead, crawling on the floor. He was reaching for a pistol that had skittered just out of his grasp. His eyes were fixed on Ren's back. He was going to shoot Ren from behind. There was no time to shout, no time to think. All of Ren's attention was on the threat in front of him. Naomi's world narrowed to the crawling man, the gun, and Ren's unprotected back. On the floor near her foot was a heavy, bronze sculpture, a stylized crane knocked over in the chaos. Acting on pure, unthinking instinct, she kicked it. The heavy base slid across the polished marble floor and slammed into the man's head with a sickening crunch. He went limp. At the same time, she kicked the pistol, sending it spinning away into the darkness under a sofa. Silence descended, broken only by the wind whistling through the broken windows. Ren turned, his weapon still raised, his eyes scanning the darkness. They fell on her, then on the unconscious man, then on the bronze crane. He understood immediately what she had done. His expression was impossible to read. He walked over to her, checking her for injuries with an unnerving, impersonal efficiency. His hands were quick and sure on her arms, her shoulders. Finding none, he simply stared at her, his dark eyes boring into hers. The air was thick with the smell of cordite and ozone. Later, in the sterile silence of a new location, a stark, modern house tucked away in the hills, the adrenaline finally ebbed, leaving behind a tremor in her hands she couldn't stop. She sat on a bed that was too big, in a room that was too quiet, and replayed the moment in her head. The crunch of the bronze hitting the man's skull. The finality of it. She, Naomi, who folded towels and scrubbed collars for a living, had crossed a line she couldn't see before, but one she could never uncross. Ren entered the room without knocking. He had a shallow cut on his forearm, which he was cleaning with a startlingly domestic-looking first aid kit. He moved with the same deliberate grace, as if the bloody firefight had been nothing more than a strenuous business meeting. He sat on a chair opposite the bed, dabbing at the cut with an antiseptic wipe. The silence stretched. "You shouldn't have done that," he said finally, his voice flat. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at his own wound. Naomi's throat was dry. "He was going to shoot you. My men would have handled it. Your man was already on the floor." She shot back, a spark of anger cutting through the fear. "You were going to be next." He finally looked up, and the full weight of his gaze fell upon her. It wasn't anger she saw there. It was something more complex, something that looked almost like appraisal. The tremor in her hands worsened. The lie she had been telling herself for days, that she was just a victim, a bystander, crumbled into dust. She had not acted to save a stranger. She had acted to save him. "I told myself," she began, her voice shaking but gaining strength with each word, "that staying here was just about survival. That I was just waiting for you to let me go." She took a ragged breath and met his unflinching stare. "I was lying." It was a confession, laid bare in the quiet room. Not of love, not of affection, but of a darker, more binding truth. She was tied to him now, not just by circumstance, but by her own choice, by her own actions. A muscle feathered in his jaw. He set the first aid kit aside. He rose from the chair and crossed the room to the window, looking out at the darkness. For a long time he said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, as if scraped over gravel. "The Hashimoto Gumi now know a woman was in the penthouse. They will look for you." The implication was chilling. He wasn't just stating a fact. He was telling her that her old life was no longer a safe harbor she could dream of returning to. It was a liability. It was a target. His war had just become hers. And to prove his point, a moment later, one of his men entered, holding out a tablet. On the screen was a grainy, nighttime photo. It was her apartment building. A digital red circle was drawn around her window. It was a message. "We know who you are. We know where you come from." The choice had been an illusion all along. There was no going back. Ren's response to the threat was swift and absolute. He planned to dismantle the Hashimoto Gumi from the head down. The leader, a man named Old Man Hashimoto, was notoriously reclusive, protected by layers of security and loyalty. Ren's plan was a surgical strike on a private club Hashimoto frequented, a place his men had been trying to infiltrate for months. Ren intended to handle it himself, leaving Naomi secured in the safe house, a protected piece on a violent chessboard. But Naomi couldn't be just a piece anymore. As she listened to Ren and his lieutenants discuss the plan in hushed, urgent tones in the next room, A detail from the attack in the penthouse snagged in her memory. The man she had knocked out. Before he lost consciousness, he'd been muttering, delirious with pain. Something about a delivery. About the kitchens. About a girl with a camellia tattoo on her wrist. It was nothing. A stray piece of information. But the club they were targeting, the Gilded Cage, was famous for its kitchens. And Hashimoto, she'd read in a news article online, was a notorious connoisseur of a rare type of tea, delivered fresh every Thursday night. Tonight was Thursday. She walked into the planning room. The three men fell silent, turning to look at her. Ren's expression hardened. "This does not concern you." "The delivery entrance," she said, her voice clear and steady. "You're planning a frontal assault or a stealth entry through the main floor. You should go through the kitchens. They use a specific catering service every Thursday for his tea. The servers are a blind spot. They're considered invisible." Ren's lieutenant scoffed. "How could you possibly know this?" "Because your enemy told me," she said, looking directly at Ren. "He mentioned a girl with a camellia tattoo. She's probably the one who serves the tea. She's your way in. She's the key you don't have." Silence. Ren stared at her, his mind clearly working, reevaluating his own flawless plan against the improbable intel from this woman who should be hiding under a bed. He saw the logic in it, the audacity, the kind of detail that could only come from the inside. "I'm going with you," Naomi said. It wasn't a question. "Absolutely not," Ren stated, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. "You need me," she countered, stepping closer. "You don't know what this girl looks like. I do. I can point her out. I can create the distraction you need to get close to her. You can't afford a mistake tonight. You said it yourself. They're targeting me now. This is my fight, too." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time, she felt he was seeing an equal. Not a liability, not a victim. A weapon. In the end, he did not agree. He simply told her to get ready. The Gilded Cage was a den of quiet opulence. Naomi wore a simple, elegant black dress, her hair pulled back. She looked like she belonged. She walked at Ren's side, his hand a firm, warm presence on the small of her back. They were just another wealthy couple out for the night. But beneath the surface, the tension was a wire pulled taut. She spotted her almost immediately. A young server, moving with quiet efficiency, a delicate spray of camellia flowers tattooed on the inside of her wrist. Naomi met Ren's eyes and gave the slightest of nods. Her part was simple, a distraction. As the server passed their table, Naomi stood up abruptly, stumbling, knocking a glass of wine directly onto the jacket of a notoriously hot-tempered Hashimoto lieutenant at the next table. Chaos erupted. The man was on his feet, shouting. His bodyguards moved in. It was the opening Ren needed. In the confusion, he moved like smoke, intercepting the server on her way back to the kitchen, his words to her unheard in the din. The key had been turned. Naomi faced the rage of the lieutenant, her heart pounding, but her face a mask of apology and fear. It was all a performance. She played her part until Ren's men, disguised as club security, intervened, escorting her away. The rest was a blur of controlled violence happening just out of sight. Shouts, muffled sounds, and then a profound silence. When it was over, Ren found her in a quiet hallway. He was untouched, his suit still immaculate. But there was a different light in his eyes. He led her to the roof of the building. The rain had finally stopped. The night air was clean and cold. Below them, the city glittered, a universe of tiny, unaware lights. He stopped at the edge, looking down at the world he commanded. He turned to her, and the silence between them was no longer heavy with threat, but with a new, unspoken truth. He reached out, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw. The touch was so unexpected, so tender, it made her breath catch. "My grandmother thought you were a ghost," he said, his voice a low rumble. "A memory of a debt I could never repay." She was wrong, his thumb brushed her bottom lip. "You are the one who collected." It was not a declaration of love. It was an acknowledgement, a claim. He saw her, Not as a replacement for the woman he'd lost, but as the woman who had walked into his life and refused to break. He stepped back, creating a space between them. Your old life is gone. That apartment, that job, they don't exist for you anymore. I can give you a new one. Any name, any city. Enough money to live comfortably. Far away from all of this. Far away from me. It was a genuine offer. A path back to a kind of safety. A normal life, purchased at a terrible price. She could be Naomi again or someone like her. She could be free. She looked at the sprawling city, a world of strangers. Then she looked back at him, at the lethal stillness that was his second skin, at the intricate ink that marked him as a king of a brutal world, at the eyes that had seen her, truly seen her, in the middle of the storm. She didn't give him a verbal answer. The time for words was over. Instead, she closed the distance between them and reached out, taking his hand in hers. Her fingers, calloused from years of hard work, intertwined with his. It was a choice made in the quiet of the night, under the watchful eyes of a million city lights. It wasn't acceptance. She was no longer a ghost in his house. She was its foundation.